We have so many different sources of energy. But which one is the best option? Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. In this video I want to talk about the different sources of energy that we use to power our civilization and compare them to each other to really come up with a solution as to which is the best option for us to use. Now before I get into it, please like and share this video to give it a boost. We have used many different sources of energy to power our civilization. But I think it's important to compare them to see which is most effective. So I'll be going through the different sources of energy and compare them using 6 different categories. Those categories are cost, how much it costs users to use a certain energy source; power output, how much electricity we get from a certain energy source; is it renewable? Will we run out of that energy source at any point? Damage, how much damage does the given energy source do to the environment when we produce electricity from it? Safety, how safe it is for humans and the frequency of accidents that are involved in a particular energy production. And reliability, do we have access to a given energy source on demand, i.e. when we need them? So first up, fossil fuels, oil, gas, coal, etc. First up, cost. The cost is actually quite low given the abundance of it. Output, there's a lot of energy stored within fossil fuels, which is why one of the reasons why we've been using it so much. Is it renewable? No, we will eventually run out, although recent predictions on when we'd run low on fossil fuels have been quite wrong. Damage. The CO2 produced by burning fossil fuels does affect the climate. It does raise the temperature of the planet, although how much it does that is disputed. Safety. This is an interesting one because while deaths from oil and coal energy production is actually quite high, deaths from gas energy production is actually much lower, which is why we've been switching from oil and coal to gas. And last, is it reliable? Yes. And that's actually one of the biggest strengths of fossil fuels. It is such a reliable energy source as it is so easy to store. So we have it when we need it. Next up, solar and wind. So first up, cost. It does cost a good bit to build solar and wind farms. Output. The power output of solar and wind are actually quite limited due to how much solar and wind energy can be captured for energy production. Is it renewable? Yes, and this is actually one of the main selling points of solar and wind power. Damage. Solar and wind farms actually do cause damage to the environment, especially in the area where they're actually built, simply because of the fact that the land has to be cleared of all vegetation in order for them to be built. And that does cause damage to the local environment. And wind turbines kill large amounts of birds, including endangered species. Safety. While in use, deaths from solar and wind power are actually quite low. But when solar panels reach the end of their lives, they release toxic chemicals into the environment when they're thrown out or when they break, due to the chemicals that are in them. Reliability, and this is actually one of the biggest downsides to solar and wind. They don't produce energy all the time. They only produce energy when the sun shines and the wind blows. Which is why a more reliable source of energy is used to cover the downtime, like fossil fuels, and this actually increases costs to users. Next up, hydroelectric power. Cost. It's actually relatively cheap, to be fair. Output. Hydro does produce a good amount of power. Quite a lot more than solar and wind, but a good bit less than fossil fuels. Damage. Reservoirs made for hydropower actually damage the environment where they are built, as the land has to be flooded for that to happen. Also, hydroelectric power does actually produce some CO2. Renewable. Yes, it is actually quite renewable, given the fact that the power is produced by moving water. Safety. Hydroelectric power is actually pretty safe, although it's actually more dangerous than solar and wind. Reliability. Hydroelectric power is actually quite reliable, as the water can be released to begin power production at any time. One downside to hydroelectric power that does need to be said is that the locations. One downside to hydroelectric power, which does need to be said, is that the locations in which it can be implemented are actually quite limited. So to use it en masse, it's not as scalable as other sources of energy. So next up, nuclear fission. Cost. Due to the high energy output, the cost to users of nuclear fission is actually really, really low. Output. It actually has the highest output of any of the energy sources that I'm talking about in this video. To give you some perspective, it's about 1 million times the energy output of coal. Is it renewable? We will eventually run out of the uranium fuel used in today's reactors, although reactors can be built using other radioactive materials that are more abundant. Damage. A lot of people think of the nuclear waste. Well, if it's stored correctly, that nuclear waste doesn't actually do any damage to the environment. Safety. Despite the public perception of nuclear energy, it is in fact exceptionally safe, given that accidents caused by it are very, very rare. Reliability. As the power output of a nuclear reactor can be sped up or slowed down using control rods, energy production can be regulated to meet the demand needed. And finally, nuclear fusion. Now, I do have to say that we don't have the technological ability to produce energy en masse from nuclear fusion. So the following is actually based on expectations, based on what we know about it so far. Cost. I actually don't know. I've done a little bit of research into that, but I couldn't find any solid answers of how much it could cost users to use nuclear fusion power. But given its abundance, and if the infrastructure is put in place properly, it could be even lower than nuclear fission. Output. The output from a nuclear fusion reactor is a lot higher than a nuclear fission reactor. It's about 4 times that of a nuclear fission reactor. Is it renewable? Pretty much. Since it uses deuterium, which is plentiful in our seawater, it's pretty fucking renewable. Damage. Nuclear fusion doesn't actually cause any damage. It doesn't produce any nuclear waste. The only byproduct of nuclear fusion, if they use deuterium, as deuterium is a kind of a different version of hydrogen essentially, when they fuse that together, helium is produced, and helium is an inert gas, so it doesn't actually cause any damage to the environment. Safety. Due to the specific conditions needed for nuclear fusion to occur, accidents would be very unlikely, if not impossible, given the fact that if something was to go wrong, those conditions would no longer be there, so the nuclear fusion would stop. And reliability. Again, we actually don't know how reliable it will be, given that we can't do it en masse yet, but some predictions have shown that if it's done right, it could be exceptionally reliable. So to conclude, the reason fossil fuels are used so much is because we've much greater knowledge in producing energy from it, as well as its high power output and its great reliability. Despite the strong push by environmentalists and politicians, the limits of solar and wind energy prevent it from replacing fossil fuels. Hydroelectric power is effective, but it is limited in the number of areas it can be implemented, so that does hinder it quite a bit. Nuclear fission should be the thing, I think, to replace fossil fuels. But due to the bad reputation of low probability accidents like 3 Mile Island, Chernobyl and Fukushima, the likelihood that nuclear energy will get a good push is unlikely. Not impossible, but unlikely. So what do you guys think? Share your thoughts with me in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear them. And if you like this video, hit that thumbs up button and don't forget to subscribe to keep up with my latest videos. I do think it's important to look at every source of energy we have and compare them to understand which is the best option for us to use. Now, while fossil fuels is the fuel of choice, there are other options that should be considered, like nuclear fission. Although only time will tell whether those options will be explored to the extent they should be. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.